All right, welcome everyone. My name is Eric Marks. I'm on the MPSC Board of Directors. First, some MPSC announcements. The summer edition of our magazine, MPSC Wavelength, has arrived in members' mailboxes and is also available online. There's tons of great content in this issue, including my interview with Leilani Ramirez, Senior Manager of Dialogue at PlayStation. I'd highly recommend checking out the full magazine at mpsc.org. At the MPSC store, you'll find lots of fun stuff for the summer in our Summer Waves collection. Head to mpsc.org/store to see which clothes and items best suit your style. And our MPSC YouTube channel, you'll find lots of great sound advice events from the past few years. Head there to see sound breakdowns with the teams who worked on Mr. Robot, Better Call Saul, Metal Gear Solid, and much more. And thank you for coming to tonight's sound advice event. Educational film programs at high-level universities have been around for nearly 100 years. And the first program began just a couple of years before The Jazz Singer was released and changed the way sound was worked on in conjunction with film. Film schools have grown exponentially since the 1920s, and during that time, sound has taken on an increasingly important role in the films that we all watch and work on. So how do aspiring filmmakers learn about sound editorial? What benefits are there to learning these skills in a prestigious film program, and how have these programs evolved over the years? As technology, creative ambitions, and the sheer amount of content have scaled up in our industry, education has become exceedingly important in crafting the voices of tomorrow. Tonight, we'll discuss everything that goes into educating sound editors in today's content-rich world. We have an incredibly accomplished group of guests here to talk about all of it. Our first guest is a former MPSC board member, an MPSC Golden Reel Award winner, and was nominated for an Academy Award for her work on Armageddon. She has edited sound effects and dialogue for films such as Crimson Tide, Broken Arrow, and The Rock. She was the director of the award-winning documentary Making Waves, The Art of Cinematic Sound. She is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and is the Kay Rose Endowed Chair in the Art of Sound and Dialogue Editing at the University of Southern California. Please join me in welcoming USC professor Midge Costin.
Hello, everybody.
Our next guest is the 2020 recipient of the MPSC Golden Reel Awards Career Achievement Award. She has been the Senior Vice President of Post-Production Sound at Paramount Pictures, where she has overseen the sound on films such as Star Trek 2 and 3, Beverly Hills Cop, The Italian Job, and The Addams Family, among many others. She was the first woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing for the original Top Gun, and later won the Academy Award for her work on The Hunt for Red October. She served on the executive branch of the Academy and was the very first female president of the MPSC in 1984. Please welcome UCLA professor C.C. Hall. Our third guest is the chair of Select North America, an international association of film and TV schools that includes over 180 educational institutions around the world. He has been the supervising sound editor of countless documentaries over the course of his career. He is now the Senior Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at Chapman University. Please help me in welcoming Chapman University professor Michael Kowalski. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It's really a pleasure and very excited to speak with you all. My first question for everyone, what role did education play in each of you launching into your own careers in sound prior to beginning work?
So I did my graduate work at USC, and honestly, Ken Miura, who was everybody loved, like in the film Making Waves, The Art of Cinematic Sound. Ken Miura was the one responsible for connecting Walter Murch and Gary Rydstrom and educating them. And he was up helping George Lucas, build the stages, kind of wiring things up. And he was on sabbatical when I was doing a lot of sound, the basic sound work. And so I felt like I was interested in editing, but sound seemed like it was just this necessary technical thing you did at the end of the picture. And I really wasn't paying attention to sound, and because I think it wasn't being, we were learning more like the technical stuff. It was almost engineering things, and so I wasn't connecting it with story. And so I always tell that story about how I wasn't connecting with story until I came out, and then I lowered myself and took a sound job because I really wanted to be a picture editor. And then once I took this job, because but you know what the biggest connection was? Well, no, okay, I had to do my own sound, and everybody does. And I think that's really important, you know, at film school, that everybody does their sound. So whether you want to direct or do costume or, you know, casting or whatever, I think it's really crucial that you do everything. And so doing my own sound, at least I knew the basics. I knew how to do effects. I did not know how to cut dialogue, let's say. And I didn't know anything about mixing. But so I think because I had I did hands-on stuff, it was that was helpful. But you know what the real connection was? It was the connections that I made with people who were then in the sound world. So Cece, you know, one of the reasons I think I ended up at Paramount with you was because Hudson Miller, who was you know at USC with me, and then Dan Hageman was the one who pulled me in and said, Midge, none of the union guys will touch 16 millimeter. Come in and I'll show you how to. That was at Chameleon Sound. And so there was always like a connection from school when I was at school. So it was really the networking. I always tell that to students when I'm on admissions. You know, the important thing is kind of networking almost, that's one of the major things that you get out of graduate school, besides the big loans that you'll end up with. Anyway, that was my big, you know.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have a very similar story in that, I mean, first of all, there were barely, when I started working, I knew I wanted to be a film editor. And of course I wanted to be a picture editor. And at the time there were barely, there were film schools, but it was more film appreciation. They weren't so specific. There wasn't such a broad curriculum like there is now. So I just came to Los Angeles, and very similar experience. I got some jobs cutting picture, which I really liked. And then, and Mitch didn't quite say this, but this is kind of how it was then. You were kind of looked down if you were just a sound editor. And at the time, a lot of people would refer to us as like, oh, gee, you couldn't make it as a picture editor, so you went into sound. And what happened is that at the time, I was editing pictures, I was doing a lot of trailers, and I was looking for somebody to do the sound for me. And I couldn't find anybody. Nobody wanted to do it. And so I just started doing it myself. And I really kind of liked it. I knew nothing. I taught myself how to dialogue edit and cut effects, and I figured this stuff out. Eventually, I was freelance for many years, and then I wound up doing a job for doing a Western, which I loved doing those, for a guy. It turned out he was an executive at Paramount, and said, hey, you know, come for an interview, and the rest is history. But it was a very similar thing. I started doing it, and then people paid me money to do it. And I was making really good money. And I thought, well, I shouldn't stop doing this, you know. And I really liked it. I didn't just like it, I loved it. And I was having so much fun with it. And at the time because Midge mentioned working there, I never worked for Chameleon, but I would use their library, and I would go there, and it's where I met my oldest friends in the business, who were, and I'm still close with Steve Flick, and I met Richard Anderson, and it was an extraordinary education for me, and the best film sound school I could have gone to, because the person who was the head librarian was Terry Ecton, who is just this amazing, brilliant sound editor, who's responsible for a lot of Saving Private Ryan with Gary. And the guy who ran the transfer department was Alan Splett, who I still consider the greatest sound designer of all time. So I was learning so much early for free from these very accomplished people. So it was a great beginning.
Yeah, I actually started out grad school. I was at USC, but I was in visual anthropology. And we took kind of, I think first year was all in anthropology. It's a very kind of arcane. It still exists, actually. It's a one-year program now, but it was a 3-year program. First year was in the anthropology department. And then the second year was actually at the film school. We did the first year, but focused on documentary filmmaking because visual anthropology is ethnographic film, basically. And I, was very interested in doing documentaries. While I was there, I had a sense that I should learn something useful. And I kind of realized that no one wanted to do sound, so that was a good sign. And also, a lot of the films I liked had what I thought was kind of interesting sound design. I don't think we actually called it that then. Interesting sound. So when I finished, I took some classes. There weren't that many sound classes. This is back in late 80s, early 90s. But I took all the sound classes, which, I must admit, didn't quite prepare me. This is pre-digital. I learned the fundamentals, I think, which is important. And then what happened was my classmates, of course, started getting grants to make documentaries. And because I was the only person interested in doing sound, I would get hired. And I kind of learned by doing sound on these, on these documentaries. Many originally, I think most of them were like kind of PBS type docs, but they kind of grew in size and scope. So that's how I, then obviously, so I basically kind of self-taught also at some point.
Very interesting. Each of you from different backgrounds, very much so. So you each kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you think education about sound has changed in the years since you began your careers?
Well, I can say, we have so much more to offer now. I think that when I was in film school, but I think it's the same for the others, the film school was kind of thought as, they had the monopoly over the equipment. People didn't have dubbers at home. They didn't have flatbeds, and you kind of went to film school to make projects. And there wasn't, again, even though USC had a very good sound department, there weren't that many classes. You kind of learned by doing. You worked on quote unquote like 480 projects, as we called them. I think now what's changed is the fact that students all have Pro Tools on their computers. They have the plugins, and a lot of the students can do a lot of the work outside of school. If you walk in, oddly enough, if you walk into our post-production suites, a lot of times they're empty. Students are working, but they're not working there because they have their own equipment up to a certain, obviously they're not mixing, but they can dialogue edit. They can definitely cut effects. So I think there's kind of an irony. Now we have all this, digital equipment that's accessible, but the students have access to it on their own. So I feel that there's, for me, I think the shift is there's more specialization to a certain degree because of digital technology. But there's also more, I think we feel that, our job is to teach them how to be storytellers. We teach them the skills how to, about, how to do sound, post-production, sound production, sound, but more than anything is how to be storytellers.
Yeah, I thought it was, I would say in a lot of ways, just like the industry, what we used to have to go to transfer to get anything, you couldn't even reverse something, and so what we can do now because of digital, working in the digital world, that makes a huge difference. But the truth is that it's what Michael was saying at the end, is that it's all about sound design. Like why I couldn't wait to get back to teach, because I was so lost, like I didn't get it. I wanted to give like a leg up to just say, hey, this is where you start. If you just put a background in every scene, it's really going to help. It's going to give dimension to your picture. It's going to give a mood and a tone. Like I just couldn't wait to get back and teach sound design, the design part of it, because you always can learn stuff. Sometimes I can be almost a technophobe, but I just learn it because I want to do it, because I want to be able to do something, and then, you like follow instructions, you can learn it. It's not that difficult. But that's what I was excited to go back and teach. And I started early, I teach at night, just like one class, just to be able to say, hey, if you just do this, and then here's what dialogue editing is. Don't cut everything out. And then when they open their mouths, like, all this traffic and everything comes out of it, like they were teaching us or telling us. It's like, don't try to get rid of everything. Try to make it all sound like it happened at the same time. And then, and just teaching them the basics. So, and I think that that's still the most important, but the huge effect, is, what they can also do. But, they're still doing stuff, and Michael, like they still come into the labs and things like that. Now they were up until Zoom, and then now everyone's doing so much more, and we're doing a lot more remote. But I think that's I hope that that's the difference. It's like when we started to come in and teach more in the 90s, like sound design, and not just teaching it in a technical, really connecting with story and character. And that's, and okay, I just want to say one thing. It reminds me of when I know how you guys do, screenings, and when the Academy Awards and the awards things are up. I went to see, I think it was the Hateful Eight, and Mark Yolano was there, and somebody asked, it always is some young guy asked, like, well, what microphone did you use? And he refused to say what microphone he used, because it's like, it's not about the microphone, it's about the principles, and it's about, getting a good recording. And it was just so funny, there was always a fight, it's like, and so it is about the equipment in some ways. I mean, we get to do so much more that, you had to wait and just hope they do it, hope, that you were on the stage, asking the mixers, but we didn't have much power. Cece might have, but, sitting on the stage, but as just an editor, if you're real, right? It's like,
Well,
you always have the power to do what you want to do. And now, of course, you can go in having done, a lot of it, the processing, the panning,
yeah, that stage thing was, it's not part of your question, but it was difficult, more difficult at the beginning, but got much better when there used to be a greater, I mean, this might be a question for later, Eric, but there used to be a big division between editors and mixers, and the mixers like to think of themselves as sort of demigods, not even demigod, but just gods. And then you would be bringing your stuff to them like some handmaiden, and can you please, fix all this? Because I probably didn't do a very good job. That's sort of gone by the wayside, because again, those two, because of the technology, those two aspects have merged to some great extent. Now, a lot of people, editors, can do a lot of pre-dubbing, pre-mixing, putting stuff in sessions and groups, whatever. But in a way, I mean, I have the same answer as Michael and Midge, I guess, as well, which is that I'm not teaching. In other words, the class I teach at UCLA is they don't have a sound editing track. So I'm teaching students in the film and sometimes producing and sometimes music program. And I love having the music people in it. So from the very beginning, it used to be a little more hands-on in the early 90s because we were still on film. We were on early I was 16 and then 35 and then working on some flatbeds and some chems. So it was easy to do all of that with the students and get them used to doing it and cutting effects together or whatever. But it was always teaching them how to think of sound design in terms of telling their story, because none of them, I mean, I actually, over the 27 years, I've had two women who wound up going into sound because they fell in love with it, which of course is very exciting. And I'm proud of that. But mostly it's about explaining to them and hopefully inspiring them and enlightening them and giving them the examples and the tools to start thinking of it as storytelling right from the beginning in the script. And to that end, I show them a lot of film clips and bring in some script pages with these kinds of notes so that they start thinking about it from the very beginning. So to some extent, that hasn't changed over all these years. And it's, I balance that it's not a hugely, trying to think how to put this diplomatically. There's not a huge emphasis on technology there. The school is really a school that is most interested in screenwriting and filmmaking and less emphasis on the crafts. There are people, I think, who go on to become editors, whatever, cinematographers, but there's not a lot of post-production emphasis. It's really a directing program. So what I'm hoping comes out of that is that after they take this class, and I'm thrilled that I do have many students who take it a second and third time, is that they just start understanding how to tell their story and how to enrich their film and bring that to it to help tell the story. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What are some differences that each of you see from sound editors coming from your programs compared to sound editors who are self-taught or coming to it from the world of music, maybe tangentially?
Well, I get one difference that I see is I do get some students who have possibly gone to a music program. I've had a fair number of students in the past who came from Berklee in Boston, which is music program. And the thing that what I find is that those students, it's sort of equally divided. They tend to be much savvier technically. They have a better understanding of the systems, the software, how to accomplish things, whatever. But it all comes back to what is their movie about? Who are the characters? What kind of Foley do they want to do? To give you a clue to the character, is the character upset? Are they angry? How do they enter the room? How do they exit it? Whatever. So, I mean, in that regard, what I see is that some of them are more technically proficient, but it's really comes down to how able they are to tell their story in terms of the content and the ideas and the imagination and the music choices they make for it.
Yeah, and I would say I agree, like get students from Berklee, School of Music in Boston, and if they have a musical background, a lot of times that's really great because they have ears, they can hear. And they really understand, sound, and then it's easier to teach them, and a lot of times they're technically more savvy. It's true. I think the biggest thing that people don't get, because a lot of people, you can kind of fall into also effects editing, and you can get that. I think mostly people don't understand dialogue editing. Now with, programs like noise reduction and all of that, it's a lot easier than it was, especially when we're on Mag. But so there's some, but there wasn't an understanding of, how to really, cut dialogue. I think that was probably the most, that's the most unusual kind of thing, or you don't quite get the concepts of that. And that, I think that's something that people aren't necessarily familiar with, and they might do a thing like I was saying, like cut out everything but the words, try to replace that with something quieter. And then of course, it's like Pandora's box, and they open their mouth and all this crap comes out.
Right.
So I'd say that's probably something when someone's self-taught too, they might not understand dialogue, how to cut dialogue.
Yeah, so I mean, Chapman, we actually have undergrad and grad. The grad program is a conservatory. We actually have a sound design track. So people apply to it, and we get all, different types of students. We get students who have some background in actual doing quote unquote sound design, post-production sound on films, or even production sound from undergrad. We do get students with musical backgrounds, and we get people with zero. It's kind of interesting. We had a student who came from business school and for some reason wanted, and he actually did great. So undergrad is more comprehensive. It's a 4-year program. It's part of a, obviously a liberal arts education, but in the last 2 years, they have to pick a specialization. So we do have a few, usually, I don't know, 5 to 8 undergrads who pursue sound, and they take a few more classes. It's less in depth than the grad program. So what I would say that, what they do get is a very, I mean, they quote unquote, complete post-production sound on a number of films. So they're very familiar with the whole workflow. I'm not saying they're masters at it, but they're very familiar. Some are better than others, or some are better in some area. Some love Foley and they do great Foley, but they understand the whole process from kind of beginning to end. I'd like to think from script to screen. In terms of the sound, I'd also like to think that they have also an appreciation for, again, storytelling. I think that's, I think this is what we all teach, and that's really what distinguishes, I think, and it's one of the hardest things, I think, to learn and teach, is how do you tell the story with sound? What is the story and how do you tell it with sound? So
this answer might differ for you, Michael, but just curious generally, when do each of you typically see students decide to focus on sound specifically, or maybe for you, Michael, focus on a specific division of labor within sound within your curriculums?
Yeah, I mean, I could go first because undergrad, actually, they're not, they start out, they all want to be directors. So they all come in, I think we have like the cohort's about 75 students. Most of them want to be, directors. And I would say that they take the intro sound class, and usually that sparks an interest. And so it's a combination. Part of it is like, they're like, wow, this is really cool. I'm a musician and this is something I relate to. The other thing that I find happens a lot is they go into the first production class and realize I'm not a director. And then they start, and this happens a lot because I always ask students and they're always like, yeah, I really don't, for whatever reason, they don't like it. Some of them like being in that dark little room with a screen and some, left alone with their sounds. But so they have to declare by the end of their second year. But, I would say most of our students know kind of, and again, we have 5 to 8 that are interested, but it's usually that, it's critical that first class be, how should I say, engaging and not technical, because they all come in with the expectation that sound is very technical. And then they're like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And that's usually what happens. So.
How about you, Midge and CC? When do you sort of see them become interested in sound?
Most of our sound, so we also have undergraduate. I mean, most of the things that the classes I'm teaching, and most of the sound classes, or all the production classes in the first year for graduates and undergraduates, the same thing when they really start. The classes, they have to do everything. So that, but Michael, same, right? Grads and undergrads, they all come in and they want to be, not only do they want to be they want to be directors of feature films, writer directors of feature films.
Right.
And then it's like, and that's what I realized is I hated being on the set, and I realized post-production was for me, it was too chaotic and on the set. So, but they come in and they want to do that. And then, so they do sound, and it's just, so they direct. They might direct and do this. We try to do it early on, have them direct and then do the sound on their films because they'll care, right? And then, but they're revolving around these roles. So there's trios, and it's like you write, direct, and do the sound on your own film. then you do camera and, you're the DP and the editor and the producer and whatever. So, they just kind of switch roles. So it's always that, but it's just so interesting to see some people come in and, I mean, they do that and they're surprised, at how much they like sound or how it, and a lot of times it is, they have a musical background. I mean, that's what happened to me. I kind of had a musical background. I didn't even think about it. Once I got into it, it was like, oh, okay, I like this. I think maybe I think more in terms of story and sound. But then we have intermediate classes that they can take, if they want to, or go on and do other things. But I want to say, but you know what, there were some professors who are like adjuncts if you look at like who are graduates from USC, you're always hearing that they've done well in sound. So honest to God, sometimes people would say like, oh, you should go, if you really want to do well or get in the union, or I don't know, get an Academy Award or something, go into sound. And so you'd have these people who had no sense of sound. And they try to do it thinking it was like easier, which it's not easier to get jobs, in sound. And it was like, oh my God, like if some people just don't have. And so they, and I always say that at the beginning, if anyone told you to go into this because it's easier, or it's more likely that you're going to get in the union or you're going to get a good job or something, it's like, don't do it.
No.
And because then they intellectualize, and instead of having a good sense of how to use sound, they'd intellectualize the process, and it was like, oh my God, it was a disaster. So yeah.
Well, I don't, as I said before, I just never have any students who want to pursue this. And I mean, what is rewarding is that I take whatever undergrads want to take the class. It's supposed to be a class just for graduate students, but undergrads come to me or they'll email me and it's like, yes, come. So then I'm always gratified because then I get them a couple of years later if they come to graduate school, whatever. So I get very, very few converts to sound, but what does make me happy is that they are all, as a group, because I see what they say at the end of the class, they're surprised and shocked that they like it as much as they do, and that they get into it and they see what it can do, and how much it does to the film and how much it affects the film and how it helps the storytelling. So that's really gratifying. And that, I mean, that's sort of worth everything because that's the whole point. And what I'm pretty sure is that by the end of the class, they at least have a concept, because they are all going to be directors, as Mitch said, of feature films, no matter what. And I have had a few that did go on to make that 3-picture deal. But at least they know the language and they know what it can accomplish. And I feel they're better informed filmmakers, and they have more expectation now of what that can do for their film. So.
What sort of trends have each of you seen in your students over the years that you've been teaching, like from students 15, 20 plus years ago to now?
I would say that the main one that I've seen, and this is maybe, I don't know if it's a millennial thing, but it's definitely Generation Z. And this isn't just sound students, this is students in general, is group projects. They are very fixated on wanting to do group projects, kind of. They also are they don't respond as well to lecturing. They find it too passive. They want to be more engaged. And usually anything that involves the internet is a winner. It's but that's probably the main trend that I've seen, and I think it's kind of a Generation Z phenomena, and maybe millennials too.
I think that there's more interest. I see more interest and more understanding of sound, and not just, it used to be just put music over everything, and I used to have to fight that a lot, and that doesn't seem to happen anymore. I think they really get that, the effect that you lose the music loses its effect if it's throughout the whole piece. And but that used to be a big thing. People would just like, put music all the way through, or want to do one song or something after another. And I feel like there's a much more sophistication. There's a lot more sophistication about sound and appreciation for it.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true. And it's also just because, as Michael said, 20 years ago, hardly anybody was using the term sound designer. There were a few people, and it wasn't. It certainly didn't get as much recognition as it does now. So I think my classes in the last 5 or 6 years are much bigger than they were 15 years ago. So I think that's just a result of them being more aware of how important sound is. And, there's so much more conversation about it. There's so much more written about it. Lo and behold, I opened up my New Yorker last week, and there's a whole article in there about Foley, and it's a terrific article, but I don't ever remember reading anything in the New Yorker about sound, period, much less Foley. So I think they're just more aware of it, and which is great, and have a better idea of what it can do for them.
That's amazing. Resources within film schools can sometimes be difficult to come by. And I imagine it can be a challenge to get the piece of the pie that the sound department deserves. Would you say that the sound departments are getting more resources now than in years past, or has that balance changed at all over the years?
At UCLA, I'd have to say that's sort of a resounding no. And there are so many more sound editing and sound design programs at all these universities than there ever were before. And it's great to see that people regard it as such an important part of filmmaking. But I'm friends with Midge, and I have, I'm friends with my oldest friend in the business is Steve Flick, who is also a professor at USC. And I sometimes have to remind myself in conversations with people that the University of California is a state school. And they simply don't have the kind of money that USC has. Or I taught at SCAD, I don't know, about 10 years ago, which was phenomenal and a lot of fun in Savannah. And, those are programs dedicated to getting the latest equipment and making sure that the students have the latest technology to work with. And UCLA does the best they can, but in terms of allotment, in terms of budget, do we have more now than we did before? Absolutely not. We're lucky to have as much as we had 5 or 10 years ago. Probably get in trouble for saying that, but I don't really care.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, at Chapman, we kind of have the opposite situation. I sometimes feel we're over-engineered.
I bet.
Yeah, and the students kind of get seduced by the technology.
Mhm.
And I wish, I mean, there's all this technology. And number one, there's a learning curve. It's like we finally set up our Atmos system to teach Atmos, and I'm sitting there going, okay, when are we going to teach this? How's that going to work? I mean, we'll figure it out, but it's sometimes I've said it in our Foley room. We just have too much equipment. I'm just like, put a little mixer and a button in there. It's just so there's talk back, and let's just get going. The students come in there and they can never figure out, how to, on the S6, how to talk to the people in the room. And so there's a learning, but we're lucky. I mean, we have, there's a big portion, the university gives us, fairly large budget for equipment and maintenance, and we use, it's with, for sound, a big chunk of it is, or, a decent chunk of it is dedicated. So that's one area I'm never concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of duke it out, the different tracks, cinematography, who's going to get what. They try to be fair about who's getting what, who needs new things. And the important thing, I think that we all feel in all the different, tracks at USC is that in the production division, they pay a lot of money. We want to make sure that they have use of equipment that they're pretty much going to see when they go outside. So we try to keep upgraded as much as we can, and we try to stay, up with the industry. Sometimes we try not to go too ahead of it, like what you might be saying, Michael, too, because the thing is, what happens is sometimes, like Dolby, with Atmos, they came to us, and so it's like the athletes, like the best athletes in the world who can afford, the equipment and stuff, or the best shoes or whatever, given them free. And that happens at some schools. I know sometimes they'll come to us at USC, and we have to make sure that is that in the industry yet, and sometimes, like on Pro Tools, we'll get too far. We'll be like way ahead of where they are, because nobody wants to change. It's like, it's all working, but and we try not to get like the staff to upgrade things too soon, because it's not happening in the industry. So we try to stay equal to and do what's happening out there, so that when our students graduate, that they know that they're familiar with the industry.
Yeah.
And that's important.
And that I want to comment on that. That's really an important point. And also, what I find a little frustrating is because you want the students to become familiar with what the most current technology is, and to have a basic understanding of it, because in spite of the fact that they're all in a directing program, I encourage them to, to think about the fact, I mean, this is one of your later questions, Eric, but they're going to go out into the world. And what I actually say to them is, it's really unlikely you're going to walk out of here and someone's going to hire you as a director on a feature film. It's unlikely someone's going to hire you as a director on pretty much anything, So it's really important for you to develop these skills to be able to work in some aspect of filmmaking. And the more you know about the technology, the better. So being familiar with the Avid software and being familiar with the Pro Tools, good heavens, that's a pretty basic thing. I think that's all really important. So it's important that they have that available and that they become knowledgeable in it.
Yeah, sometimes we have to watch, like Eric, you might know this, but we'll have to watch because like staff, like the faculty, this is sometimes where we can, let's see who's on this, anyone that I know from staff at USC, but what happens is they'll go to like NAB, or they'll go to these conferences, and they'll see stuff they think is cool, and it's like, has nothing to do with the industry. Right. And then, and then it's like, oh, Jesus, like we don't need that, or nobody's doing that, and right. We've had some issues like that are like, ugh. So it's important to, kind of stay. The other thing too, Cece, when you were saying that, I'll tell students, like, go to your mix, like, spend time in your mix. It might be like watching paint dry to be in a dialogue when they're, pre-dubbing the dialogue, but go to it, because you can't pay to get in when you're out in the real world. So try to show up, for everything, color timing and just anything. It's like, try to show up with everything, because the equipment is there. We do have it. And you want to just see every process. It just makes you better at what you do. That's one of the things I think USC has a decent reputation about. If you get a USC education in production, you will have at least, you'll know kind of the process, because you've had to do everything, and I think that that's really important, even if you don't think you're gonna, go into that area, because we're also interrelated, all the different departments. It's really important to understand them, to understand each other. So
right. And I always encourage, we don't have an in-house mixer. There isn't a faculty person that does the mixing, and there really are no students who are pursuing mixing. So we don't have that availability. We have a mixing stage, that's what I'll say about that. So what what I did with a couple of colleagues was about 4 or 5 years ago, was because I had been going out into the world and asking friends and editors and mixers I'd worked with for 100 years, can you help with this, or can they pay you a little bit of money, whatever. So we created like an approved vendor list, and it's a whole bunch of people who are very good, some of whom are famous and outstanding, who are willing to do this for the budget that the students have. But part of that process is that, and we had some, we had some issues during COVID, it became more difficult. But part of that process is that they interface with their editor and with their mixer. I try to get them to do as much sound editing as they can for themselves, especially dialogue. I mean, I start at the very first class saying, dialogue is the God. It's the backbone of your sound design. And the whole process of getting them to create a guide track based on the best performance and the best microphones, whatever, no one has told them to do that before, so that alone. But all the vendors, the whole idea is for them to go to the stage and experience that process. For me, it was always the cream on the top of the cake. It was like mixing was the most fun. That's where all the good stuff happened. So it's imperative. It's part of what we're teaching, is that you have to interact in this and you have to learn to make these decisions. That's your job as a director. And that's the most important thing for them to leave with, is to know how to do that, to know how to collaborate, to know how to talk to these people and make these decisions.
Absolutely. What do you all think the long-term effects will be of the pandemic on young sound editors today?
I mean, one thing that we just did a lot more, we did everything remote. So, okay, so it's good experience because so much is being done remote in post. So we were doing a lot more. I think that was good. One thing is that they didn't get their hands on the boards, on the mixed console. So that was the negative part of it. And the other thing is, and I think there's been some dire consequences, is that they weren't getting the experience on the set, in production, and they weren't, that was that was problematic. And they said, and I was on sabbatical all year, so I don't know, but my colleagues said that they showed up and they didn't know. Students didn't know anything. As far as just sound, I'm not sure, but it could be production sound is hurt the most, because that is the key, if they don't think about, if you don't start with good production sound, man, you just like behind all the time, so much more has to be done in post. So, yeah. But were you saying specifically sound design?
Yeah, I guess sound editorial or sound in general, just students coming out of school now from your programs, kind of what,
yeah,
if there will be any effects.
Probably on the mix, that they're missing that mixed stage.
Yeah, at Chapman, we actually went back into production when the industry did. So we followed very strict protocols. We had very small crews. I think that in a way is a good experience for them to kind of, live through that adversity. And the projects that came out that year were actually pretty good because they were contained. So they had to focus on character and story. The one advantage, I think, and it's something I've learned too, is, working remotely. And a lot of our students who graduate, I talk to them, who are working remotely. They don't go into, the office or to post the suites. So I think that's an asset, this ability to do the work and to interact with people remotely. I don't know how it affects collaboration. I assume it's a little, some of them I've said, have you met the rest of the team? And they're like, no, I met the supervisor. I don't know who the other people are. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, so much for networking. I taught a class, a large kind of overview of post-production class, and it was the weirdest experience I've ever had. last semester. It was the most and I don't know, I think it's the pandemic. They don't know how, and I'm not saying that this whole generation is going to be like this for the next, this is, I think they're going to shake it off at some point. But in the short term, I can tell you a lot of instructors have been actually articles in the New York Times saying this has been a weird year if you're back in person, and just the way the students interact or do not interact in class. And that's been an issue, behavioral issues too. We've had a lot, but again, I don't know if that's a long-term effect, but I do appreciate the fact that they've learned how to work remotely. I'm not sure that that's going to be permanent, but it's an asset, I think, for them.
I would just second that. I think in terms of I thought it was a disaster. I mean, I thought it was very hard. I felt bad for them because I didn't really understand how they could be taking production classes and not physically be there and working with the actors. So I think it was hugely difficult for them. It was really hard because so much when you're teaching, so much depends on the ability to make eye contact and see how they're responding to something. And you get a sense right away, like, are they getting this? Do they really understand this? Are they seeing the big picture of this, whatever? So I think they lost something in the process. But on the other hand, I think everything you said about the pros of that are absolutely true, because that's pretty much how they're going to be working a lot more in the future than any of us did in the past. I feel bad that they didn't have that one-on-one collaborative experience. Hopefully they'll get it in the future, but they now know how to work remotely and make that work.
Mm-hmm. What do you find that as you're teaching your classes to students who are interested in sound or focused on sound, what do you find is the most difficult thing that students have trouble wrapping their heads around?
Dialogue editing.
I didn't want to be repetitive, but that is true.
Yeah, I was just meeting with some students this week, and I was just like, oh my, I thought they took the class where they learned how to do this. They just noise reduced everything. I was kind of like, yeah, there's no room tone, there's no handles, there's nothing here. One of the, I'd be curious to see what the others say about this. One of the things that perplexes me is their ability to follow written instructions. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I give, when I give a project, I give very kind of, there's parameters, or these is all the things you need to do. And I'm always amazed that, they show me their project and I'm like, did you read the handout that I gave you? I mean, I'm at the point now where I want them to actually have to kind of sign off next to, to hand in the copy with a little sign off, like, check the box, I've done this. And I worry sometimes. I'm like, you realize when you're working, you're the director, someone's going to give you a set of, this is what I want done, or these are the changes, and you've got to follow them. That's the expectation. So that, for some reason, for me anyhow, has been kind of a challenge, I think, in the last few years. So
what I think is the hardest at the beginning, and then for the most part, I have to say it changes by the end of those 10 weeks. I think unless they've taken the class before, or they've taken other sound classes before, I think the hardest thing for them to get their hands around or their heads around, whatever, is that, and I say this to them in that first class, this is going to completely change your movie. You are going to have a completely different, better, much more elevated film if you do what you're supposed to do, and if you follow all of the guidelines in this class. And I think that first or second class, they're really polite, and they think, oh yeah, okay, we're going to do all this, and we give them various assignments, and they do a great job on the assignments. but I don't think it's until the 4th or 5th or 6th week when they've started doing some of this stuff, like actually honing in and creating a good dialogue track without all 3 tracks playing at the same time, and having chosen the best performances and the best microphones. I think by the 7th or 8th class, they finally see how it's starting to affect their movie and what the sound is actually doing. But I think it takes all that time. I think they have to see it, and it's a pretty hands-on process, because you know, we have the class just once a week, but then I meet with them one-on-one over the 10 weeks, and I try to meet with all of them at least twice and maybe 3 times. So we're just focusing on their film. But I think they think that film will help, the sound will help, but I don't think they really get the big picture, which is understandable, until they've really dived in. So.
Yeah, I would agree with the thing on the dialogue editing. You know, what happens all the time is that even though I've gone over it, they've had a class, they've had exercises, then when they go to do their projects, it's like, and I swear to God, I have to sit and what I do is I dialogue edit in front of them. You know, I just dialogue edit and dialogue edit. See, this is, and sometimes with the undergrads, I feel like, oh, good, at least one scene is mixable.
Yeah.
I try to don't tell anyone I'm saying that.
Right.
But you know, and I get through it. It's like, okay, and then you get it, and then they're like, oh yeah, like they, you know,
Yeah.
and then it's so funny because then they start to hear, like they never heard the clicks, or they never heard that, you know, they
Right.
never hear these things.
Right.
That we hear that, and so I just have to sit with them. I swear, it's both undergrads and grads, and in the initial projects, and then in the more advanced projects. The other thing is that they don't get, this is true across the board, I swear to God, cars, they don't get engines. And I don't know if it's the hybrids or what is going on, but nobody gets a car. I'm like, really? That's it? I mean, that sounds like the production car. That's nothing. You know what I mean? And everything, it's like, I'm so disappointed in, like, what is up with that? Is it the car, how engines sound now or something? But nobody, there's a, you know, it's like, something happened there, you know, the speed changes, or a shot, you know, the shot changes, and it's like, don't leave the sound the same.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's an opportunity to like really make it dynamic. It's like, oh, they're trying to get away with like one sound for something, you know, and it's like, oh my God. But do you find that, Michael and Cece? I don't know. It's like,
Yeah.
nobody's
Yeah.
doing cars.
Yeah, I think part of it, Midge, is that we all, I mean, we're not the same age, but we all grew up in a time when cars were all very, very different. And I can still remember, you know, sort of muscle cars and hot rods, and even, you know, how a Lincoln sounded so distinctly different than a Dodge Charger or whatever. They sort of, they don't have that anymore. I mean, sometimes someone will ask me like, oh, well, what kind of car is that? And I'm like, I don't know. To me, they all look alike now. Even Mercedes and Toyotas, they just all look the same to me. And I think that's sort of how they hear them all the same. They aren't that different.
Yeah, I think the irony too is that, you know, I mean, at Chapman, I'm sure at your schools, I mean, we have a library of sound effects. There's like 10 million sound effects. I mean, there is literally every car, every year, every perspective on that model. And you're just sitting there going, you say, is that the right sound? Like, what's a car? I'm like, well, yes, I'm sure it's a car. Like, how long did it take you to figure that one out? So, I mean, they have the tools. I mean, I think when we were coming up, it's like, oh, you got to get a car. Oh my God, we got to go downstairs to the sound lab. We're going to open the book. We got to find something. We got to get the vinyl out. We got to find, you know, it just transfer it, dub it. And now it's just, so.
Well, sure. And also in those days, it had to do like, you know, with the character of the person. You know, if he was a certain kind of a guy, he was going to have a car that really had some engine to it, that had some muscle or whatever. And then, you know, it was all relative to the kind of characters and the comments you were making about them. And they, you know, in all fairness, I have to say the cars do all pretty much, you know, I have a friend have friends who have Alexis. I never even know when the car is on. So I don't know.
Yeah, like Eric, I don't know if we should answer some of the questions in the thing, but there's just a few things that they're talking about. What do you do? You know, if your director isn't interested in, you know, doing things, you know, they want something weird or dull or whatever. This is what I say. Get always, you know, it's the director, it's their movie. So you give them what they want. But I always suggest, and I always would just do what I think is right. And then get, you know, play it like with them, but then say, just listen to this, because I think that this, you know, see what you think about this. And then just always, you know, try to do your best if you've got a better idea of sound, and see what you can do. But you know, you don't want to fight them, and it's definitely their movie. And if they want a mini for a truck sound, the other thing you can do too is try mixing it and just say, well, what about if we put a sweetener in here? Here's the one that you want. Maybe if we just put a little of this in, and then hopefully, you know, you can kind of talk them. But you got to remember that it's like, you're not, you know, we're doing sound for somebody. It's not our film. But you do try to give them the best, you know, because it's unfortunate when when someone doesn't know, isn't going to listen to their department head, whatever department it is, if they know better, you know. But yeah, so I'd slowly kind of talk them into it. But it's, and you know, but always show that, play it for them, you know, play it and see what they say.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask another question or two, and then would love to take some audience questions. Feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll ask your questions here as well. So I also wanted to ask, just what's one thing each of you wish you knew at the beginning of your own careers that you're so glad that you know now?
Gee.
You know what? One of mine, Cece, it comes from you, in a way. I hated being on the mix stage, because I felt like it was a hostile environment, especially to women. And also I'm a lesbian, and I was so afraid of like LGBTQ. Oh my God, that didn't even exist at the time. So here I am, a woman, and then I'm a lesbian. Jesus, because I felt like I was out, you know, that I didn't fit in. Now I did with my friends who I was working with, my editing friends, and that was always felt okay. But so I wouldn't stand up for. I was afraid to say anything, you know. And what I realized through talking, actually. Cece has some funny stories, but what I realized is that they didn't realize. Okay, I found this out. I used to think that these guys, and I was one, because you know, Cece can attest to this too. There weren't many women who were cutting effects, and I was cutting. You know, I started out just as an effects editor, and so you know, I felt uncomfortable or whatever. But I felt like, oh, they're intentionally, you know, whatever, not choosing women and all this stuff. And the truth is, they had no idea. They had no idea that it was hostile environment. Somebody, because on the mix stage, someone was always going through a divorce because their lives were, they lived on the mix stage and they had no, right? And so somebody's always going through divorce, and they're saying terrible things about women and the words they were using and everything. So it felt hostile. But the truth is, like Cece tells a story where she confronted them.
Midge, you're not going to tell the story, are
I'm
you?
not going to tell it. It's too crazy, but they don't know. They don't, it's not intentional. So if you ever feel out of it or whatever, like if you can, you know, speak up and say something, because usually people are, you know, working, especially us in sound, right? Like it's, but just, you know, try to break through that. And I wish I had more confidence in a way. Now I do, but it's probably just my years, you know, being an elder now but I just didn't, you know, I didn't always feel comfortable, but I didn't say anything. And I honestly feel like if people knew they were, you know, making you feel uncomfortable, they might change their ways or whatever. And I just wish that, you know, I wasn't so, you know, afraid to speak up or to say something, you know, and feeling different than.
But that's a really good point to it's very hard. It's very hard when you're starting out. And I think it's also very hard for students. It's one of the reasons that I tried to create this kind of mixer situation so that they'd always be working, these vendors, with people who were supportive and cooperative and would listen to their ideas, because I would just try to encourage them to talk about what they wanted it to accomplish. And one of the things I actually asked them to do is write a kind of an emotional diagram of what's happening through the whole film. Like, what are they feeling here? What are they feeling in the next scene? What are they feeling? Because I would say, if, what I wish I'd known earlier was really to do just that, to really learn to express what I was just trying to do, and to learn to be more collaborative early on, and really ask for help. And I didn't really learn that until 4 or 5 years that I was into it. So there was always this kind of, it was a hostile environment. It not so much now, but and I will tell a very short version. I won't tell you the story. I'll just tell you what the story was about, which what Midge is talking about is that, and everybody will encounter this, is that sometimes people don't know, especially if they've all worked together. It's just like those mean girl cliques in high school. And you have the jock guys in high school or whatever. They don't really know the effect they have in people. And when people work in a kind of insular group like that, they take on a certain attitude. Things are much better now because of diversity issues and equality issues, whatever. It's very different. But at the time, they were all guys, and they were all, what I used to say about them is, listen, you have to understand, and this is not true of all of them, but these are guys that drive pickup trucks and live in, the boonies or whatever. Okay. I mean, I personally wish I had a pickup truck right now, so I'm not criticizing that. But there was an occasion where it got to be very, very difficult, and it was a very hostile environment. And one of my editors, who was just a terrific editor, and a woman, said, I can't come to work anymore. Can't do it. Can't be on the stage. So I went in the next day and I shut the door, and I had a little conversation with them. And I used a lot of words. And I said, this is what you're creating. And I know you guys, and I love you guys, and I know you don't mean to do this, but you can't do it anymore. So I want you to get all those words out of your system, and you can say them all right now. And then I never want to hear them again, or you guys are going to be gone. Now, I was not in charge, well, I was sort of in charge, but I mean, I didn't have the authority to fire them, but I would have gone to someone and said, this is it. And I just kept it between us. I didn't go to their boss. I didn't go to anybody else. I said, this is just between us, but you guys don't realize the effect you have, and you have to stop it. And that was it. That's all it took. That's all it took. So in a sense, I wish that I had learned that earlier, to say to people, because it used to be intimidating. And, to say to people when I'd cut a reel of dialogue or something, I tried to do this. If I could have done it differently, or if I could have, tell me how it could have been better, or what I should do in the future, or whatever. And I found that was very effective, because I then later got on a show that was extremely difficult. And I went to the mixer and said, I'm really having some issues here. Can you help me in any way? How can I make this better? How can I make it work? And boy, that's all it took. And then from then on out, it was smooth sailing. So I think anybody in any situation like this, sometimes you just have to speak up and ask for help, or ask for support, or whatever. So I wish I'd learned to do that sooner. And I think if you let people know you're just trying to do your best, and you want to hear, whatever they can tell you, or whatever they want to say, it's just a good approach.
Yeah, I would agree. I've learned a lot from my peers. I'm always asking questions. I'm always, it's kind of what I like about documentaries. It's usually a small project. I'm there with the director, the producer, the editor. I'm always, even if it's not directly sound related. I just learn a lot just from talking to them. I would say that, for me, the concept that I kind of wish I had known was just the notion of dynamics. I just kind of, in how it, the role it plays, not only in sound and, editing and everything. And I find that I use it more and more in my teaching. And I feel you could dedicate a whole semester to it. It's so critical. And it's kind of hard to explain too. Sometimes, it's easy to explain because obviously it's contrast, but at the same time, it's harder, I think, to explain, as a principle that you can apply to a project or something, effectively. And I think we have it, I understand the notion of, I have it innately, I understand the notion of dynamics, but understanding it kind of conceptually, I think I kind of wish I'd learned that in film school because it's critical.
We're going to open up to some audience questions. This first question is from Cheryl. Midge, you might have already touched on this just a little bit, but I'd love to hear more. Are there any assignments or topics or projects that you see routinely sparking engagement with your students?
Yeah, I had a project that I used to do in my intro class that the students really liked because it was very, it just involved a lot of creative use of sound. Expressive use of sound was a young man walking down a hallway and looking at the doors of the hallway. It was a fairly long shot. And so the whole idea was, and it was very internal, what is he hearing? And I said, it has to start kind of in the building and then go into his head. So we have to progress. And so every time he passed a door, I wanted to hear something coming from behind that door. And the students loved it because there was so much to play with. They could do anything they wanted with that.
And I wasn't sure, or I didn't quite understand the question. The project.
Yeah, it was just about if any particular assignments, topics, or projects have routinely sparked engagement in your students.
I always just start out analyzing scenes, and a lot of times it's opening to movies, because I always say that about, before even a picture comes on the screen, you're usually introduced to a film with sound. And so I often show openings to movies, and one of them is Catherine Bigelow's Hurt Locker. I just go over the first 10 minutes, and I keep stopping, and so that they can see, because a lot of stuff is happening outside the screen. And what, the tension, to build the tension, because they're all joking with each other, trying to say, I'm not, I'm cool, I'm not nervous about this. And of course, these jets are going by and helicopters, things you don't even see, and then it gets really quiet, talk about dynamics, and then it gets really quiet. So it's just stopping and saying, and then asking. And the other thing I think that's really important is to make sure everybody says something, that there's no wrong answers to that. What did you notice, And so I have small classes. And so I usually try to pull out, just so that everybody is aware. Let's look at these, because it's really hard. Because when I'm looking at something, it's I'm not thinking of the sound. I'm getting pulled in by everything. And I don't know how the sound affected me. So, and I've learned that over the years too. A lot of times you have to go back and you have to play something again, because they're just watching it for story, So, but if I keep stopping and then just analyzing how somebody else does. And I try to do it based on knowing what the scripts are, something like their films. And then I really, I have them work on a film that was from a former student's, film, just so they can get the idea. But I get even their rough cuts or assemblies. I get their own movie right away. Start putting something against it so that they can start, because it takes time to percolate, thinking what am I going to use? Is this going to work? What can I use for backgrounds? What can I use for effects? And I want them to work on their own stuff as soon as possible, because everything's so individual. I don't know if that answered it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, one of the things I do, especially now, it's a little bit easier now that we're back in class, is it's always good to use these other examples. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll ask students if they're willing to show their film in class. So we'll show a student's film and we'll look at it. And for the most part, they're not more than 15, 20 minutes at the most, we'll look at it. And then I'll ask the director about the film or what it's about or what they're trying to convey or whatever. And then I'll ask the students to look at it again and see if those things are coming through and what they could do, what the director could choose to do in the film or what he could cut, whatever, to reinforce those themes. And then we look at it again. I'm always amazed. They have so many ideas and they have great suggestions for someone else's film. They see it when it's someone else's film. It's hard for them, to do that for their own film. So I have to sort of encourage them to think that way. But the minute they're looking at someone else's project, oh my God, they're just full of great ideas. And, they just become little terrific sound designers. And that's always terrific. And they get it. They start getting it that way. And then the other thing I do is I have an assignment I give them, which I really like. And I tell them to pick a title sequence from any movie they want and to score it. And they have to use at least 5 different pieces of music. And they always say, well, what kind of, I said, whatever music you like, if it's rap or hip hop or classical or, Cuban or, steel drum, pick whatever you want. And they come up with the most amazing. And one of the girls that I had last year was actually from the music department. And so she not only scored, she wrote a whole new score for the opening of The Matrix. And it was absolutely sensational. But all of them, they picked great things. So it just gets there. It's sort of, I just say to them, it's a sort of out of box experience. They start looking at it differently. They put a completely inappropriate music to something and it has this amazing effect. So they start getting it and it's fun for them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the question from Jeremy, is there something no longer in sound curriculum these days, maybe a craft technique that's obsolete, that you wish was still part of what students have to go through or learn because it offers a valuable lesson?
Cutting mag.
Well, I think about that all the time. I think, oh my God, because I loved cutting dialogue. It was sort of the ultimate Chinese puzzle. And Pro Tools came in. I got it for the sound department, but I wasn't cutting it. I thought, oh, if I could just, so I do that with my students. It's like, oh, look right there. And then they match perfectly. The waveforms, if I had that then it would have been fantastic. But no, I don't think any of us would want to go back to Mag.
No.
The only thing about it that was interesting was about how we trained our ears. I mean, imagine this, Eric, we're going through and listening and we're just like doing this with our thumbs around.
Yeah.
It was, and just listening to the sound, and, so it was really like we trained our ears, I think. Sometimes we didn't even have a picture, It's crazy.
What I do wish, this really has nothing to do with technology, but what we used to have is we used to have a whole lot more time. We used to have a whole lot more time to do the job, and we used to have a lot more time on the mixing stage. And that's really, so much of that is evaporated, and unless it's some huge picture, but it's that the luxury of having the time to work on something and then look at it and go back and make adjustments and whatever. I wish that were the same.
Yeah, actually, to your point, Cece, so we've had a couple of questions about this. Faith has a question. Do you have any tips about increasing your editing speed or practicing editing in order to get better at it and faster at it?
Oh, wow.
Experience. I mean,
I don't know. I mean, certainly it's much faster with all the digital systems than when we were all cutting on Mag. But You know, I love a comment. Carol Littleton, who's a wonderful picture editor, years ago in an interview, they asked her, well, has it helped? Can you go faster because you're editing digitally now? And she said, well, the actual editing, I suppose, goes faster, that second or two, but the thought process, the creative thought process about what it is you want to do, that still takes the same amount of time. And, you know, you're thinking about all this.
I would just say, you know, what's interesting is, I don't know what your experience, you guys' experience is, but everybody learns shortcuts, and you know your shortcuts, and you can do, like, I can't even challenge some of them. I just have to say, oh, I don't know what the keys are. I have to, my hands just do that automatically. But what's funny is that people don't necessarily share their shortcuts. And so you can learn from each other. It's like, we're all learning it all on our own, and we're in our own room and we're doing things. And so just talking to other people, you might find some really good shortcuts. The other, and then creating your own, I would just say that, because that makes a huge difference how you do things. So,
Yeah, actually, I have an interesting quote that actually Midge and I were at a sound conference in Singapore, and there was this brilliant quote up on I can't remember whose presentation, but this is, I think it says it all. It's from a Japanese, I'm not sure what he is, but in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the experts, there are few. And I think that that's what speeds up that's what I tell my students. I say, look, you can achieve the same thing I do, or, Walter Merz, Gary Rydstrom does. It's going to take you a day. For them, it's going to take a lot less time, because we, from experience, know how to eliminate. We don't have to try everything. We know how that works. So, that's, I think, kind of ties that's really about coming up with something from a creative perspective. Because the students have the same tools that anyone, just about the same tools that anyone else would have, any sound professional would have. The difference is, again, is just the experience.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Tim. Any advice for older folks who have been working in the industry for a while to add to their education, short of going back to school? I'm all over tutorial videos on YouTube and courses offered online, for example.
It seems like everything's on, YouTube has just about everything. I mean, I ask questions too, when I'm looking for things, it's like, that's where I'm going. It's kind of amazing what's there.
I mean, what I think has also happened in the last 20 years is the proliferation of books, and some very good, some scholarly, some more technical, and some in between, on sound design. I mean, I remember when I started teaching in 93, 94, I mean, there was Labruto's book. It was a series of interviews. There were literally 3 books on sound. I mean, that was the extent of it. Now, I mean, I have an incredible bookcase. I haven't read them all now. I buy them. I mean, I have just bought a book on Jean-Luc Godard's sound design. I mean, it's like, wow. So, I think that's what, I mean, besides the internet, obviously, that has a lot. There's so much written on sound now. And it keeps coming out. I mean, students will tell me about books, other professors will tell me about books. So, there's a lot out there. That's all I've got to say,
I can't, maybe I shouldn't confess this. I was an art history major, so I used to think, oh, I can read all that stuff. I can't read that anymore. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like, I can do it, but I just can't read some of the theory stuff or whatever. It's too, I don't know what they're talking about. That's why I think like movies or YouTube stuff works for me, but boy, my brain just can't take that.
No.
The theory stuff is like, it's beyond my 66-year-old brain.
We have a question from David. In what way does the film or sound department encourage diverse study in the other arts and humanities to bring something other than merely craft to future filmmakers?
Oh my God.
That's a great question. I mean, as much as possible, I try to be interdisciplinary. I mean, actually in talking about dynamics, I talk about Beethoven. You know, Walter Murch is great for that. If you want ideas, just read Walter Murch because he's talking about everything. You could just bring it in. But, you know, I talk about science. I talk about psychology as much as possible. And I think that's important, actually, especially within the context of a liberal arts education,
Yeah.
to draw those relationships.
I think that's the most important thing. And I mean, it affects everything you do, but the more you know, or the more you're intellectually curious. And, you know, I was an art history major, a fine arts and art history major. And I always thought, I'd work in a museum and did for a while. But I think the more you have all those different expressions of the arts and you're familiar with them, you bring all that to the table. I mean, it's part of your own creative decision-making process. And, you know, sometimes also, I mean, I happen to also be a big movie buff. I love movies. I grew up in dark movie theaters with my mom. So it's just all of those things, whether it's history or paintings or whatever, it all resonates creatively with you. And you know, you see something or I hear something and immediately takes me to something else, or I watch a movie and, you know, I can tell that in the script they've stolen a line from some historical novel or something. I think you bring all that. So the more you know that you bring to any of the arts, it's more productive.
And the other thing too is not just other arts, but also I think that, you know, understanding yourself, psychology, and, you know, that really, and also trusting your own instinct or your own experience. And so writing or getting done, like Mary Sweeney at USC teaches in the writing program, and she teaches a dream class, and it's so fascinating. And she brings in all these different people from different, you know, walks of life and different art forms and whatever. I go in and teach, you know, I do a sound class, but also sometimes we've worked with some people from the Brain and Creativity Institute, which is incredible, you know, so it's like, it's a lot of different things. I mean, cross-pollination, but really understanding yourself and then trusting yourself and your own experience. Because
Right.
sometimes, you know, when you bring your own experience, I've just, you know, found this to be true that, you know, first when I was at school, I used to think, oh, my experience is so different than other people's, they won't get it. But when you do something that's true to your experience, it's so true that it's universal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, do trust yourself and trust your own experiences and how you react to sound or dreams that you've had or whatever. And it's really amazing. So kind of digging deep too within yourself, and that's kind of interesting.
Right, because it's
Great
also
advice.
the whole filmmaking, right, it's a very emotional process. And the more you're in touch with that, the better it's going to, the easier it's going to come and the better it's going to work.
We have a question from Daniel. I live in Cuba, a place where sound education pretty much doesn't exist, and our economic situation is dire, to say the least. Is there any scholarship you have knowledge of that could help set me up in this direction? I've been working professionally in audio, and I would really like to enter this world. I enjoy it.
I mean, I would say that, and I don't know if they have Fulbrights for Cubans, but the Fulbright program, and we get a number of grad students from there, is great because it not only covers the tuition, depends how much the tuition is, but it does a pretty good job of covering the tuition, probably most schools, and also giving you money, you know, to live. So I would, you know, I don't know if the Fulbright program applies to Cuba, to be honest, but that's, you know, if not, there's just scholarship from schools, but most film schools tend not, unfortunately, to give kind of full ride scholarships, as far as I know. We do give some support, but it's nothing, nowhere near 100%.
There's also a sound editor. He was the president of the MPSE, and Eric Tommy's probably going to shoot me, but Eric might be able to put you in touch with him, because for years, Eric, you know, Tommy McCarthy went down to Cuba. And they had a long, for years and years, they had a sort of long tutorial time that they spent down there. Now, and I think this might have been after, it just seems to me, it was a long time ago. So I don't know if it was after Obama managed to sort of open it up. I don't know politically exactly when it was, but you know, if there was a way for him to contact, or maybe Eric, if you could stay in touch with this person and ask Tommy if he still knows what's going on down there. You know, because they did it quite, at one point he talked to me about maybe going, and I couldn't, I was working, but this was some years ago. But I know that, you know, there might still be somebody doing something down there, so.
Oh, that's a great point. I think it was Daniel who asked the question. If you can email me, I'll put my email in the chat, and I will try to reach out to Tommy and see what information he has about that.
Yeah.
We had a question from Yu Ting. Aside from student films, where else can students find files or projects to practice dialogue editing?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of recycle older student projects. I don't think I've ever seen any projects.
I don't know where you'd find them. But I know the best way to get experience is just to offer to help people and cut, which is, you know, what I started doing. I would just offer to cut sound effects for people when they didn't have any money or whatever. And I learned a lot from that process.
Yeah, because I was I was an effects editor, and then Richard Burton and I volunteered on somebody's short, and we learned how to cut dialogue by doing that. And there's always, people are always looking for things. If you go to school,
Right.
you know, and put your whatever, somehow, you know, just let them know that you do it. So it seemed like when it first started out, or when I was learning something new, yeah, you almost have to volunteer and just, you know, practice.
I'd like to close it out with a question. What is the most important concept that students should understand before graduating and looking for work coming out of your programs?
I have a quick, easy answer. Take any job that's offered to you, if it's even vaguely related to filmmaking. The more you know, the better, the more experience you have all the way across all of it. It's great.
I would say be collaborative too. I mean, it's be nice, because, you know, these are the people that might rehire you. These are the people you're making connections with. So, you know, it's amazing. Sometimes students don't understand that they think it's all about their skills. I'm like, no, you know, personality, you know, in this kind of work, when you're, you know, working 16 hours a day under a crunch, and you want to work with people you get along with and they're pleasant. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I say this all the time. The most important things that I teach, it's not just one, but it's show up on time, do what you say you're going to do, make your deadlines, be a good collaborator, because those are the things that will get you the job. There's a lot of talented people, but it's who do you want to spend 12 hours a day or 18 hours a day with? And even if you're doing it remote, who do you want to be collaborating with? And when you finish your work, you ask somebody else, do they need help? And you reach out and help, you know, someone. And that's how, you know, and you end up working with the same people and getting hired over and over by the same people.
Yeah.
And those are the things that matter. The other thing I would just say, if you're a student and you're just about to go out into the world, or resume, make it one page, take all those student films that are student films, and don't call them student films, call them shorts. Say
Shorts.
exactly what you did, say at the top what you want, the job that you want, sound editor, you know. And then, you know, and then just do these and say what you did, effects editing, you know, dialogue editing, whatever. And then if you also did like production sound, but try to get it all on just
One
a
page.
page. And then you just want to see what someone has done, like what they've worked on and the role that they've played. And then if it's gone to any festival or done anything, you put that important thing, or a director that someone knows, or an actor that someone knows, or something like that. But just try to, yeah. And then that's what, just make all those student films look like they're shorts. You don't have to say they're student films.
Great advice. I want to thank each of you for your time. This has been so insightful. I've learned a lot and really enjoyed speaking with each of you. Cece, Midge, and Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Sure.
Thanks for
It was
asking.
a lot of fun. Good
Pleasure.
luck, everybody. Good luck.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice to see
Thank you.
everyone from so many different places.
Thanks, Eric, for asking me.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And
Great.
organizing
Of course.
this.
Just great.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us for this Sound Advice event. Hope to see you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.